Hey everyone, welcome to the show. I was thinking about this earlier, and it just hit me. Imagine being a woman in ancient Rome.
Hmm.
Not just any woman, but a woman who's right in the thick of it. All the political drama, the power struggles.
Hmm.
And, well, she's not just watching, she's making things happen.
You're talking about a world where the Caesars and the generals, they're the names we remember.
Exactly. But, like we've seen in other deep dives, women were there too, right? Pulling strings, fighting for their place, even when the history books try to forget them.
Absolutely. And their stories often challenge the simple narratives, the ones where women are just background figures.
Which brings us to the book we're tackling today, Fulvia, by Jane Draycott.
A biography that throws light on one of these women, one who was married not once, not twice, but 3 times to some of the most powerful men of her day.
Clodius Pulcher, Gaius Scribonius Curio, and the one everyone's heard of, Mark Antony.
Yes. It really does read like a political thriller, doesn't it?
It does. And that's what I loved about this book. Draycott doesn't just dismiss Fulvia as some ambitious villain.
Right, there's more to her than that.
Yeah. It made me think, how much do we really know about these historical figures, especially women, whose voices were often silenced?
It's so easy to fall into those oversimplified stories, isn't it?
It is. Draycott's book reminds us to look closer, to question the sources, and to think about the context. Like, the late Republic, that was a wild time, right?
Absolutely, a period of incredible instability.
Exactly. And this book doesn't just focus on the big events, it dives into daily life, too. The customs, even how people showed their status. It's like you're right there with them.
The detail is incredible. You get a real feel for what it was like to live in that world.
Which leads us to one of the challenges with this kind of biography. We're dealing with sources that are often, how should I put it?
Biased.
Yeah, they were mostly written by men, and they often had their own agendas. So piecing together Fulvia's story is like,
Solving a puzzle.
yes, a puzzle with missing pieces. Draycott tackles this head-on and forces us to question everything. Honestly, I think that's what makes it so interesting.
It's what historians do, right? Unraveling the past. Trying to get as close to the truth as possible.
Exactly. And that's why, for me, Fulvia is a solid 4 out of 5 stars.
I agree. Draycott's a skilled storyteller. You get the scholarship, but it's also a really engaging read, the kind of book that makes you want to keep digging deeper.
So let's dig in, shall we? One of the first things that struck me, and this might seem like a small detail, but it's really fascinating, is how Roman naming conventions worked. For men, it's pretty straightforward, right?
Yes, the 3 names. Praenomen, like a first name, then the nomen, the family name, and finally the cognomen, often a nickname or something that set them apart within the family.
Right, like Marcus Tullius Cicero.
hmm
But for women, it was usually just the nomen, the family name.
And maybe some descriptors to tell sisters apart. Think Livia, the sister of Drusus.
Yeah, like a label. What does that tell us about their place in society?
It's pretty telling, isn't it? Women were defined by their family connections. First their father's family, then their husband's.
As if their individual achievements didn't matter as much.
It makes you wonder how it impacted their sense of self, their ability to be seen as individuals, as agents of their own destiny, a question Draycott raises throughout the book.
And then there's how we refer to these figures today. We often use the names that became most familiar, even if those names changed throughout their lives. Like, we all know Octavian, right? He wasn't always Octavian.
Exactly. He was Gaius Octavius Thurinus before his adoption by Julius Caesar.
And that change wasn't just a formality.
It was a huge power move, connecting himself directly to Caesar's legacy. It's amazing how much a name can reveal about the politics of the time.
Speaking of power moves, let's talk about Fulvia's first husband, Publius Clodius Pulcher. This guy was a lightning rod, a real firebrand. And the late Republic, as the book describes it, was already a tinderbox.
Oh, absolutely. You had these deep political rivalries, often fueled by personal vendettas. It wasn't just about ideas. It was about power, revenge, survival.
And Clodius, he wasn't afraid to use violence to get what he wanted.
His assassination by Milo near Bouville really highlights how dangerous Roman politics had become. Imagine, both men had armed bodyguards, essentially private armies.
So it's almost like a gang war, but with togas.
In a way, yes. It shows you how fragile the rule of law was, how easily it could break down when personal ambition and political maneuvering took center stage.
And then there's Fulvia's reaction to Clodius's death.
Yeah.
She doesn't just grieve privately, she puts his body on display right out in the open for everyone to see.
A powerful image. And a major departure from the usual Roman funeral customs, which were very controlled, very ritualized.
Why do you think she did that?
It's a key moment in the book, and it really speaks to Fulvia's character. Draycott suggests that Fulvia understood how to use public spectacle, how to turn grief into outrage, and outrage into political action. She wasn't just a grieving widow, she was making a statement.
She was defying expectations. It makes you wonder why she provoked such strong reactions, both from people at the time and from historians later on.
Well, some of it was just plain misogyny, right? Ancient Rome wasn't exactly known for its gender equality.
No, definitely not. But Draycott goes further, arguing that the attacks on Fulvia's character were often deliberate tactics, especially during the propaganda war between Antony and Octavian.
Absolutely. They were using her as a weapon to attack each other, painting her as power-hungry, manipulative, even sexually deviant. Anything to discredit her and, by association, discredit Antony.
So was she really as bad as they say?
That's the question Draycott wrestles with. And it's a tough one. We have to remember, the sources we have are often biased. They have an agenda.
So we can't take them at face value. But surely there must be some truth to the accusations, right?
Maybe. But even if she was ambitious, even if she enjoyed wielding power, does that make her a monster? Or just a woman trying to survive and thrive in a world that wasn't built for her?
It's so easy to judge people from the past, isn't it? To forget that they were living in a completely different world with different values, different pressures.
Exactly. And that's what Draycott does so well. She helps us understand Fulvia in her own time, in her own context. To see her as a product of her world, not just as a villain in someone else's story.
Which reminds me of something we talked about earlier. Roman women couldn't hold public office. They couldn't lead armies. So how did they exert influence?
It was often subtle, behind the scenes. Think about social networks. Women like Fulvia were at the center of these webs of relationships. They could use those connections to advocate for their husbands, their families, or even their own interests.
And religion too, right? Like the Vestal Virgins. They weren't politicians, but they had enormous prestige and influence.
Absolutely. They were seen as intermediaries between the gods and the people. Their pronouncements could sway public opinion, influence political decisions. And they weren't the only ones. Roman women often used religious rituals, omens, even dreams to shape events.
It's like they found ways to work within the system, to bend the rules without breaking them. And sometimes they broke the rules too.
Definitely. Draycott gives us examples of women who went beyond what was considered proper. Women who spoke out, who took risks, who fought for what they believed in.
And those stories, they often get forgotten. They don't fit the neat narrative of the submissive Roman matron. But they were there, weren't they? Pushing the boundaries, making their voices heard.
They were, and their stories are just as important, just as fascinating as the stories of the men who dominated the history books.
Speaking of which, let's talk about Fulvia's family background. She wasn't born into poverty, was she?
No, not at all. She came from a wealthy, influential family. Her father was a senator, I think.
Right, and they had a villa in Tusculum, which is...
sort of like a country estate, a place for the wealthy to escape the hustle and bustle of Rome.
Yeah, and those villas weren't just about relaxation. They were centers of culture with libraries, art collections.
Places where ideas were discussed, where connections were made. It was a different world from the back alleys and the forum, but it was just as important in its own way.
And knowing about Fulvia's upbringing, it helps us understand her later choices, her ambitions.
It gives us context, right? She didn't just appear out of nowhere. She was shaped by her family, her social circle, the world she grew up in.
Exactly. And speaking of shaping, let's talk about marriage in ancient Rome. It wasn't just about love and romance, was it?
No, not for the elite anyway. Marriage was a political act, a way to forge alliances, to solidify power. And the laws surrounding marriage, they were changing in Fulvia's time.
Yeah, I remember reading about that, the shift from kumanu to SAM&PAM marriages.
A big change. Under kumanu, a woman came completely under her husband's control. But SAM&PAM, she retained more legal and financial independence.
Which would have given Fulvia more freedom to act, wouldn't it?
Hmm.
To manage her own affairs, to make her own decisions.
Exactly. And she had money of her own, too, from her inheritance, so she wasn't completely dependent on her husband's, which is probably one reason why she was able to play such a prominent role in Roman politics.
It's interesting how, even within a patriarchal system, women found ways to carve out space for themselves, to exert their influence.
It's about resilience, isn't it? About adapting to the circumstances, finding ways to make the system work for you, even when it's stacked against you.
And speaking of stacked against, let's be honest, Roman society had some pretty rigid expectations for women, right?
Oh, absolutely. There was a very clear idea of what a virtuous Roman woman should be. She should be modest, obedient, focused on her family.
And preferably silent.
Yes, her role was to support her husband, raise her children, and manage the household, not to meddle in politics or, heaven forbid, lead armies.
And yet, as we've seen, Fulvia did all those things. So how do we reconcile those contradictions? Was she just an anomaly? A one-off?
I don't think so. Draycott makes the point that Fulvia wasn't alone. There were other women who challenged the norms, who stepped outside the boundaries of what was considered acceptable.
And they paid a price for it, didn't they?
Often, yes. Their actions were criticized, their motives questioned. They were accused of being unfeminine, of being too ambitious, of being power-hungry.
Sounds familiar, doesn't it?
It does. It shows you how little has changed, in some ways. Women who dare to be ambitious, who dare to seek power, they're still seen as a threat.
But their stories are important, aren't they?
Yeah.
They remind us that women have always been there, fighting for their place, making a difference, even when history tries to erase them.
Absolutely. And Fulvia's story is a powerful example of that. She was a woman who refused to be silenced, who dared to live on her own terms, even in a world that tried to confine her.
I love how you put that. She lived on her own terms. Okay, so we've talked about her background, her marriages, the social constraints of Roman society.
Oh, we haven't even gotten to the Perusine War yet.
Oh, you're right. The event that really solidified Fulvia's place in history, or at least in infamy.
That's the thing, isn't it? The Perusine War is often presented as the defining moment of Fulvia's life. The moment she went too far, the moment she revealed her true nature as a ruthless, power-hungry woman.
But Draycott challenges that interpretation, doesn't she? She argues that Fulvia has been unfairly singled out.
Exactly. She compares Fulvia to other Roman women who were involved in warfare, who led armies, who defended their cities. And those women were often praised, weren't they? They were seen as heroes.
So why is Fulvia different?
Partly it's because she lost. History is often written by the victors, and in this case, the victor was Octavian. And Octavian had every reason to demonize Fulvia.
Oh yeah, his propaganda was brutal. I mean, those sling bullets with the insults.
Brutal and effective. They painted her as a sexually frustrated, jealous woman who was driving Antony to ruin. It was a smear campaign, pure and simple.
And it worked.
It did. It cemented Fulvia's image as a villain, and that image has persisted for centuries.
But Draycott's book forces us to reconsider, doesn't it? To look beyond the propaganda and see Fulvia as a complex, multifaceted woman who was trying to protect her own interests, her family, her legacy.
Exactly. She was a product of her time, just like everyone else. A time of incredible upheaval and violence. A time when survival often meant making difficult choices.
And she wasn't afraid to make those choices, even when it meant going against the grain, defying expectations, and risking everything.
That's what makes her story so compelling.
Yeah.
She wasn't perfect. She made mistakes. But she was a force to be reckoned with, a woman who dared to challenge the status quo, a woman who, in many ways, was ahead of her time.
And that, I think, is a fitting way to end our deep dive into Fulvia. A reminder that history is never simple, that the stories we tell and the stories we choose to believe can have a profound impact on how we see the world and how we see ourselves.
So keep questioning, keep exploring, and keep searching for those hidden stories, those untold truths that can help us understand the past and perhaps even guide us in the present.
Beautifully said. And if you want to explore Fulvia's story in more depth, there's a link to Jane Draycott's book on Amazon in the description below. Be sure to check it out.
And let us know what you think. We'd love to hear your thoughts on Fulvia, the Perusine War, or anything else that struck you during our conversation today. Leave a comment below or share this episode with your friends. Let's keep the conversation going.
And that's it for this episode of The Deep Dive. Thanks for joining us, and we'll see you next time for another journey into the past.
Until then.
Bye, everyone.
Goodbye.